Okay, fine. Good evening. From India, I am Dr. Manu Sikarwar, Project Director at Department of Science and Technology, Government of Rajasthan, and I also welcome all our experts who have joined from different countries. Dr. Nalida Pohal from Chile, Miss Guinea Smith from United Kingdom, and Dr. Shreya Ghosh. Although she is associated with India Bioscience, but as of now she is in Germany. Welcome all our experts who have joined for this webinar, and of course all our lovely participants who will be joining through our Science and Technology Open House web YouTube link. So today we will be having this webinar on this particular subject matter on best practices of science communication, and as we have three speakers from different areas, and we are very grateful to these speakers since they have accepted our invitation on a very short notice. So to begin with our presentations and to discussions, just I would like to welcome all our experts and to introduce Dr. Nalida Pohal. So Nalida Pohal is a science communicator specialized in the biological sciences. Dr. Pohal has a biology undergraduate degree and a master's in ecology and evolutionary biology, both from University of Chile, a PhD biology from University of California, Irvine, and a master's in science communication from Imperial College London. She is director of communication at the Institute of Ecology and Biodiversity and president of the Chilean Association of Science Journalists and Communication Professionals. Nerida also works as independent consultant and professor of science communication. She co-founded and coordinates the graduate diploma in science communication at University of Chile. Her main interests are raising awareness about the importance of biodiversity, training new science communicators, expanding the reach of science to new audience, and encouraging multiple interactions between science and art. She has written articles, scripts, web contents, and book chapters, edited books and blogs, photographed expeditions, recorded and produced radio pieces and podcasts, and developed a fundraised science communication projects in a variety of formats and platforms. And we will be requesting Dr. Paul for her experience in science communication. And we are grateful to you, Dr. Paul, that you have joined us. And the next speaker will be Miss Ginny Smith. Ginny Smith is a science writer and presenter with expertise in psychology and neuroscience. Ginny has a talent for making the complex comprehensible and a passion from brain science. She teaches at the University of Cambridge Institute of Continuing Education, and she is also a regular blogger and video presenter in the Cosmic Shamble Network and hosts the British Psychological Society Psycrunch podcast. She has written 4 books for DK Publishing, and her latest book for adults, Overloaded: How Every Aspect of Your Life is Influenced by Your Brain Chemicals, is now out there, and it is available on different platforms also. She founded Braintastic Science, which produces spectacular science shows and resources to help young people understand and get the best out of the brains. She also shares her skills as a science communication trainer and consultant, providing scientists and organizations with techniques to grab their audience. The last speaker is Ms. Shreya Ghosh, and she is a science writer and editor who enjoys bringing exciting scientific or technical discoveries to the notice of the public in engaging and entertaining manner. She is also having several years of experience in science communication and a PhD in neuroscience from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, India. As she is presently engaged as a program manager for science communication at India Bioscience. She is also engaged in creating, editing, and soliciting science news and feature articles for the website, as well as in coordinating various projects and publication initiated by the organizations. So, so we have three very great speakers with us, and the purpose of doing this particular webinar. So the point is that since we all know that in this pandemic times, so there is a great challenge in science communication also, because it is not possible to in communicating science physically to our students or our stakeholders. So new ways we have to look into, and of course there means different areas, means new areas and new technologies has also been developed. Quantum technology is there, then some new discoveries or some new inventions in space sector is also there. So how to communicate new views, means new these areas to our common audiences, to our stakeholders. So it's a challenge, and of course our today experts are from different areas. Dr. Nalida Bohal, she is working in ecology and biodiversity. Jenny Smith, she's a great expert in neuroscience and psychology, and of course we are interested in her book also. And Shreya, of course, she is associated with India Bioscience. It's a wonderful organization, India Bioscience. And since we have done a couple of programs with support from India Bioscience, so I really appreciate the activities India Bioscience is doing in the bioscience area. Shreya, thanks a lot for joining us, and of course to Dr. Nelida and Jeannie, thanks a lot. And so initially what we will be doing, so we will be requesting our speakers for a 10 minutes presentations about their activities, and once their presentations are over, then we will take up the questions from the participants, from the uh, from our participants, those who have joined through YouTube, and of course some questions related to this particular topic. So initially I will request Dr. Nelida for your presentation.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Manu, and I'm very glad to be here with such interesting speakers, Jeannie and Shreya. I haven't had the chance to listen to you before, so I'm super excited about that. So I will share my screen now. Please let me know if you see my screen. Yes, could you please tell me, because I can't see you right now.
Yeah, I can see it. It's coming now.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeannie. Okay, so I won't be able to see you right now because I have the entire screen taken. So please let me know if I should stop.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. So your screen is not coming. So your presentation is not coming.
Not coming. Okay. You're sharing. Okay. All right. So let me do it again then, because we just did it. Share screen. Yes. All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it is visible.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So this was the previous screen was my hello. Yes. All right. So let's cut to the chase. The people who are watching this webinar right now, what do we want? What do science-related people want? Okay. Many different things. We want more critical thinking in our societies. We want more scientists per capita in our countries. We want many other things, social appropriation. We may be interested in fair access to knowledge and information, etc. And why do we want those things? Why are we here today? What do we need for that? We need many things. We need more knowledge, not only scientific knowledge, other kinds of knowledge as well. We desperately need to change our educational systems. We need citizenship, societies that are more involved, more engaged with science, among many other things. We also need science communication. That's what we're here for today. Why is it important to communicate science? I really like this quote, so I'm going to read it, okay? To rebuild a climate of mutual knowledge and trust between science and society, establishing a dialogue authentically and not only cosmetically open to the public, okay? The key concept here is to rebuild, okay? Societies go through periods of high trust in science, low trust in science, and we want to keep that trust high as much as possible. There's many reasons to communicate science, to have a better performance in a world that is ever more technologically, developed. We need more critical thinking. We need more science to make our daily decisions, okay? To make our decisions, what to eat. Should I eat that transgenic piece of food? What mode of transportation should I take to work every day? Who should I vote for? Those are very important questions that could be enriched by a better knowledge, a deeper knowledge of how science works. Also for people to participate. Science is mostly paid with public funds, so we need to engage everyone. It's paid with everyone's, taxpayers' money, basically. We need science to entertain people. People who study science do it because it's fun. We don't do it for the money. We don't do it for the recognition. We do it because it's really wonderful. It brightens our days. Why don't communicate that love, that sheer excitement that science provokes in us? For me, the most important reason, though, is to create reasonable expectations in people. The poster on the upper right side says, "Modern science will save the world or kill us all." Those are two very extreme positions, and they're both derived from an ignorance of how science works, not just science facts, but how the process of science works. Science will kill us all is a position that many people take when they feel they've been let down by institutions in general and science. When they think science only produces, I don't know, pesticides, nuclear bombs, so I don't want anything to do with science. That's very dangerous. We recognize that. But the opposite opinion, that science will fix everything tomorrow, this technocratic view, it's also very dangerous, because then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to make any decisions. You don't care about climate change, because science will fix it tomorrow. That is not how science works. Why should scientists be involved in the process of communicating science? That doesn't mean that all scientists have to become great science communicators. That's not the point. They have to be involved in the process. They can't say, "I already wrote the paper, that's where my public responsibility ends." Because as knowledge producers, scientists are the first link in this communication network, this big chain of communication. If the very first part is missing, or just I gave you the paper, that's where I stop my involvement, then many other links in this big chain can break. And then at the end, we may have a product that, for example, has errors, for example. Scientists also are the best judges of the limitations of science. This goes back to creating reasonable expectations, communicating the limitations, the timeline of the scientific method, communicating what uncertainty means, what modeling means. All of that is very, very important. It instills confidence in the method, okay? It's not the other way around. Let's just show the shiny results and people will trust. It's exactly the other way around. As I said, it's a social responsibility, and it's been shown that scientists that participate in science communication also have personal advantages, including a higher visibility within their peer group. Okay, papers that appear more in the media, it's been shown that are also more cited in other papers by their peers. Okay, so what kinds of things should we be communicating? I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't be communicating just the sheer facts, just the diamonds. Okay, this is the diamond that some genius found somewhere in the world. By the way, that somewhere in the world is usually not our country. It's usually the first world, right? So we shouldn't be communicating just that. We should be communicating science as for what it is. It's stories. Is the people behind and their stories. And it's also, again, a process. We're taught in school that science is this, again, beautiful discoveries by really genius people. And it's very hard especially for young people, to feel compelled to do science. They may be very interested in science, maybe even before they know the word science. But if it's taught that way, if it's taught that it's done by others, by this amazing people, these brains, that people don't know where scientists really dwell. People don't even know, at least here in Chile, if you ask people, and has been done, where is science performed or done, very few people even can say universities, because people don't know what science really means. How are you supposed to have a girl from a rural town, for example, feel that she can become a scientist if she's never seen one on TV in her school books, okay? These are the things we should be concentrating on showing to people, more than just the scientific facts alone. Okay, how do we do it? We don't have time to do that today. I'm just going to give a very few words on this topic. This is what I like to call the Golden Triad. You need to think about which audience you're talking to. Once you've chosen that audience, you have to choose the format. It has to do exactly with that audience. You're not going to choose Snapchat channel for example, for senior citizens, okay? At least, I don't know, my mom would not use it. I don't use Snapchat, okay? So you have to really think about the audience and exactly where do they get their information, where do they go for fun, okay? And as important as it is to think about niche audiences, not general audiences, the general public doesn't exist, okay? You also have to think about your communication goal. What do you want that people to feel? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to be aware of? Okay, you have to have that goal very, very clear. Otherwise, you won't be able to evaluate the impact of your activities. Okay, so these three things, if you're gonna go away from this talk today, the one thing I want you to remember from my 10 minutes is never forget that these three things go always together. Once you know that, what do you want to achieve? Which communities do you serve? I really like that term used by the museum world more than audiences or publics. And you know, but which means you're going to reach those people. There are a myriad tools. Again, this is not the opportunity to talk about that. Each of these things could be its own course. Okay, there's conceptual tools, and there's many tools that are specific to different formats. Okay, do you like audiovisual production? Do you like writing? Do you like journalism? Do you like podcasting? It's an infinite, etc. But you first need to have those previous things completely sorted out. Okay. Experiment with new formats. Not if you don't see, if you don't consume, if you're not avidly looking out for how other people have done it, it's very hard to think outside the box and to think outside the common formats, the talk or the video or etc. Think outside the box. We don't have time to go through all these different formats today, but I encourage you to, if you're looking this on YouTube later, to just pause and look for some of these examples. They're really, really inspiring. And last but not least, what for? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this from our countries? Okay, and what are the obstacles in our way? India and Chile are not so different in some ways. I hate the term global south, but I don't have a better one now, so I'm just going to use it right now. We have a lot in common. You may think that Chile is a rich country. We have a higher GDP than India, but we're a way more unequal society than India. Our inequality index, it's very, very high, very high. We are in between Zimbabwe and the Philippines in terms of inequality. So that is a big deal. And I'll tell you why it's a big deal for us science communicators. It's not enough to provide information. Long story short, people may know what they need to do in order to be healthy, okay? Eat these kinds of food, exercise, go out into natural areas. That message can be taken and be acted upon by people who have the means to do it. But if you live in a part of town that doesn't have areas where you can go exercise in the morning, or if those areas are unsafe, or maybe you have to wake up really early to, take the bus to work. If that's your situation, you may have the information, but you won't be able to act upon it. Also, if we concentrate on just giving people information alone does not change attitudes nor behaviors, okay? There are many other things that determine how we make decisions, and just sharing data is definitely not enough. In many cases, it even may backfire on us. Science communication. Science is a social responsibility. Scientists have social responsibilities, and us science communicators do too. This are data from a Wellcome Trust report from 2018. It's a huge study on the people's perceptions of science and technology around the world. I think more than 130 countries were studied, were surveyed. That's the link. I really encourage you to look for this study. You can sort the data by country. It's really interesting. And one of the most striking results has to do with inequality, as I just said. Societies that trust more in science are those that are more equal. Okay, the more inequality, people feel like institutions, including science, are not serving them, and they stop trusting science. That weighs a lot more than offering just more and better and more exciting opportunities in science communication for the publics. This is what I just said. And on the right side, for example, we can see that countries that have, or people that have a higher trust in the government also trust more in vaccines. So to summarize this report, you can Google it by Googling Welcome Global Monitor. Those are the words, and it'll be the first thing that appears on your search. So again, unequal societies have low trust in science. In India, there's a lot more high trust in science than in Chile, and a lot more trust in vaccines than here in Chile. If you ask individuals, there are 3 factors that weigh more in terms of trust in science. The first is how they perceive their learning science was in school. If they perceive that they had a good science education school, they will trust more science. If they are happy with the current level of income, they will also feel like they trust more science. And if they trust the national institutions. Looked from the science side, you don't think of science as one of the institutions, as the government, the armed forces. You think science is something different. But from the outside, is seen as part of the establishment. So these are the difficulties we are confronting in our work, and this is our social responsibility as well. This is some document that some friends, we're 6 different women science communicators from Chile, elaborated a couple years ago. Just a couple months before we had our very first science ministry in the country. But I think it applies not just to Chile, but to other countries as well in general, but especially for us in the poorly named Global South. We should be making alliances among ourselves. We have different challenges, and we don't always have to look to the north, quote unquote north, okay? We should be establishing alliances among us colonized countries because we have to think what kind of development we want, and science has a lot to say about that. We don't have just to copy the model that has been imposed from outside. And those are my last words. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope I didn't take much time. I wasn't really much aware of the time. So those are my email addresses. Please contact. I'm on LinkedIn too. So please let me know if you have any more questions or you want to discuss how to make alliances among our countries. So I will stop sharing right now.
Thank you, Nelida. It's a very nice presentation you have given. Of course, in a very short time, but you have summarized all the things in this presentation, and of course, all the necessary components in which science communication is required. So you have shared all those things, and of course, so we have many similarities with Chile in science communication, and definitely we will be taking up questions and. Since you are also associated with this science journalist organization, so it will be interesting to know your role and responsibility, how science journalism is moving in Chile, what is the progress they are taking up. So thank you for your presentation. Now I request Ginny for your presentation.
Hi, so my name is Ginny, and I just want to start off by saying, Nalita, that was a fantastic presentation, and I was nodding non-stop. I imagine you couldn't see me because you were sharing your screen, but I think you gave a really, really great overview of why we need to communicate science, and I completely agree with what you were saying about stories and people and process, and that's something that I always try to focus on in the science communication work that I do. So my presentation is a little bit different. I was kind of going to talk through the different things that I've done in my career as a science communicator. I'm a freelancer, so I've had to sort of assemble my career as I go along with bits and pieces rather than working within an institution. So I will share my screen now. Share screen. Here we go. So let me just oh, sorry. Mouse is frozen. Always the best timing. Here we go. Right. So hopefully that will now be sharing. Let me know. Is that working?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, so my name's Ginny. I do a whole range of different things within the realm of science communication. I got into this pretty much straight after university. I originally thought about doing a PhD, but I was actually quite unwell during university. I became ill with chronic fatigue syndrome. So I decided to take a year off after I graduated to kind of try and get better, which didn't work. But in that year, I tried out doing a few different things. And I realized that while I loved science, the actual day-to-day doing of it wasn't necessarily for me. And what I really loved was sharing science with other people. So I'm now a science communicator, and I sort of divide what I do into two groups. There's the stuff I do for adults and the stuff I do for kids. So I'm going to start off by talking about the stuff that I do for adults. So one chunk of what I do is writing, and I write for magazines, for online outlets. I have a blog on the Cosmic Shambles Network. I've written a few books, as I think was mentioned earlier, and my first solo book was published in April. So that's been really exciting. It was a really big project, writing a whole pop sci book. The topic is brain chemistry, so how the chemicals in your brain affect every aspect of your life. So there's chapters on everything from hunger to sleep to love. So doing that involved interviewing lots of scientists, reading huge numbers of papers. I dug into some of the history of some of the chemicals, the brain chemicals, the hormones that I talk about. I think history is a really nice way of bringing in that storytelling element of science, because you can really see when you dig into how these things were discovered, you can see the struggle that went into it and the amount of time it took. Some of these scientists were working on one thing for sort of 20, 30 years. And I think that's something that's sometimes missed out in that kind of headline communication, where you hear scientists have discovered X, but you don't know that this is their life's work. And I love trying to kind of bring out that passion and the dedication that it takes scientists to actually make these amazing discoveries. So it was a fantastic experience researching the book. Really, really fascinating. And yeah, it's been good fun promoting it and things as well. So as well as writing, I do a lot of presenting. I present on screen, YouTube videos, and a few TV bits and pieces, but I also do a lot of audio presenting. My first science communication job was actually as a radio producer and presenter for a group called the Naked Scientists in the UK, who make a radio show and podcast every week. So I worked with them part-time for a couple of years, making radio shows about all sorts of different topics, which was a great introduction to science communication. I learnt a huge amount. Once you've done live radio, pretty much nothing else is scary. Particularly, we used to do a lot of Q&A shows where people would call in with any question about science and a panel of us would try and answer them. So that was a really great kind of introduction to science communication. I now present a podcast for the British Psychological Society. So again, that's interviewing scientists, trying to kind of pull out stories about how we can use psychological research to actually improve our lives. I also, pre-pandemic, did a lot of stage presenting. I do that for kids as well, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also in the UK, we have kind of science variety nights and things where you get 10 minutes of a bunch of different people talking about their science, or maybe doing a little demo, or science comedy nights, those kinds of things. So I used to do quite a lot of those on stage. Obviously, it's all been remote over the last sort of year and a half, which has been quite sad. I very much miss being in front of a live audience, but we've all adapted and found ways to do things online. So that's been an interesting challenge as well. Another thing I do is I do training for researchers who want to learn to communicate their science. I do think that sometimes we can overstate. I think scientists are great when they are great communicators, and it's wonderful when you get a scientist who really knows what they're talking about and can communicate it. But I think we sometimes put scientists at a bit of a disadvantage because we kind of expect them to be able to communicate without really giving them any specific training on that. It's like, you're a good scientist, so, oh, you'll be fine on the radio or on television or in front of an audience of kids. And I think it's really important that we train these skills as well if we want scientists who can communicate with different communities, with different audiences. So I have some training courses which I focus on storytelling, of sort of telling stories about science. So in the first session, we look at finding the story within your research. We look at kind of why humans love stories so much. So there's some really interesting neuroscience that basically says our brains are designed to tell and receive stories, that gossip about other people might even have been the very first kind of communication humans evolved for. So I think it's really important that when we are communicating science, we do it as a story, not as a set of facts. And then the second session is about actually telling that story. So the presentation skills, the how to deal with audiences, how to engage on a stage or now virtually. So for example, one huge tip if you're ever presenting virtually is to make sure that you look directly into your camera, your webcam, rather than looking at the screen. So you'll see now I'm looking at the screen and it won't feel as much like I'm making eye contact with you. Whereas if I look at my camera, you should feel that connection a little bit more. So it's those kinds of tips that people don't know until you teach them. So I hope to help scientists by teaching them those sorts of communication skills. I also do some consulting. I work with museums and other groups who are putting together exhibits or hands-on demos for events and things, and help them to develop interactive, engaging content. So that's the kind of stuff I do for grown-ups, for adults. The other half of what I do is all around my brand Braintastic Science. And Braintastic is aimed at helping young people understand their amazing brains and get the best out of them. So we spend a lot of time, again, pre-pandemic, going into schools and also going to events like science festivals, occasionally kind of other community festivals and things. And we do hands-on shows and workshops where kids can learn about their brains, about their memory, about their senses, and really get involved and hopefully get engaged with science. We have this little character, Bryony, who is kind of part of our brand, and we hope makes it fun and engaging for the kids. And as I say, we do live shows. We currently have adapted a lot of them for online delivery. So it's been quite an interesting challenge trying to take a lot of my demos that you can see here usually use quite a lot of kit and getting people up on stage. So in one of those pictures, I'm putting an electric current through the dad's arm to make his hand twitch, and the son is controlling it. In another one, I've got some ear swapping headphones on that little boy, which makes sounds seem like they're coming from the opposite direction. And the bottom picture, I'm dressing those kids up like a neuron, and then they have to pass messages and pretend to be neurons. So as you can see, it's really interactive. So adapting it for online delivery has been quite an interesting challenge over the last year. So that was just a kind of whirlwind tour of the different ways that I have engaged with different communities, different audiences over my sort of 9-10 years of doing science communication. You can find out loads more about me on my website. So it's Ginny Smith Science for my adult stuff and Braintastic Science for the kids stuff. So I will stop there so that we have time to hopefully take some questions at the end. And I look forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Wonderful. Means as an individual, you're doing a great job using your expertise in neuroscience and psychology. And a lot many things means one has to learn from you. And I believe that means for an individual science communicator, so we should have that kind of ecosystem also, to create that kind of ecosystem which supports an individual science communicator. So it's a great thing. And of course, we are really happy that you are there at our webinar. So we will be taking up many questions with you. Now I request Shreya for the presentation.
Thank you. And first off, let me say I feel really lucky to be going third at this presentation because Nelly, Jenny, you made so many of the points that I was going to make that you have made my job really, really easy. I'm going to try and share my screen, but yeah, it's going to be hard to follow that up. Let me know if you can see my screen. Is it visible?
Not yet. Coming. Yep, it's visible now.
Great. Thank you. So, yeah, my name is Shreya. I work as Program Manager Science Communication for an organization called India Bioscience. And today I'm not going to talk about India Bioscience so much as I want to spend some time on talking about how science communication or SciComm is currently done in India and what are a few of the ways in which we can perhaps take this further or improve. So I think the most basic question to start with here is, why do we communicate at all? What's the purpose of any communication? Now, there can be many answers to this, but I would argue that it all boils down to this. We communicate to convey meaning, and meaning can be facts, meaning can be opinions, meaning can be emotions, meaning can be anything. It's something that we want transferred from our mind to the minds of the people we are communicating with. So, in this condition, what makes communication successful? And my answer is that it's four things. First is content, knowing what is it that you want to say. And second, very important, is knowing why you want to say it. Your purpose in communicating science can be to just to tell people about some exciting new discovery, but it can also be to educate them, to promote something, to build scientific temper. But it's very important to have this goal in mind when you are starting off. The third in this quadrant is audience. As Nelly mentioned, it's very important to understand the community that you are engaging with, and there is no such thing as the general public. So the way you would communicate with a group of children is very different from the way you would communicate with your colleagues, say, or from the way you would communicate with an expert. So it's very important to know this. And finally, it's the medium. How is it that you are reaching your audience? And your communication is going to differ based on, again, the audience you're reaching, the format you're taking, and all of these. So 4 key ideas: content, purpose, audience, and medium. Coming to India, where I have been working for the last several years, as many of you in the audience would know, that science communication in India is still in a pretty nascent stage. We have a rich history of scientific advances, of technology development, of some great communicators in various languages who have come up over the years. But as an organized, structured field, it has not seen the kind of development that it needs to see. So challenges include, obviously, very prevalent right now, misinformation, disinformation, fake news. And it's very different for somebody who's not trained in science to even pick out when what they're hearing is not true, especially if it's coming from someone in a position of authority. Then there are limited funding and training opportunities. So for a well-developed SciComm field, you need SciComm practitioners, people who are doing science communicators. And right now we don't have enough courses or full-time positions for them, which also results in a limited job market, which tends to be concentrated in what we call the Tier 1 or the metro cities primarily. And this is not just India's problem, this is a global issue. There's growing lack of trust in media and in journalists. And finally, getting accurate scientific information out of institutions in India can sometimes be challenging due to the level of bureaucracy and red tape that is often there. So this may make it seem like the situation is bleak, but it really is not so. And that's because there are also some great rewards, the good stuff, as I call it, to doing science communication in India. These include that in the last few years, the dialogue or the conversation around science communication and the need for it has really, really grown. When I was doing my PhD, I didn't even know that this existed as a field or a career option for someone like me. But nowadays, I see a lot more awareness, I see a lot more recognition that this is something that serves a useful purpose. Similarly, there is a small but very active community of dedicated communicators in India, and many organizations that are, some are government funded, some are privately funded, that are trying to support this field. India Bioscience, where I work for, is one of those. And in recently, before the pandemic and also during it, there have been discussions about introducing policy level changes that enable, again, better science communication in the country in the form of resources, structures, funding, all of those. And that is, again, a very, very welcome change. And finally, I guess most of you are here because this is something that you care about: building scientific temper, increasing awareness, increasing critical thinking, rational thought. These are things that you care about. And so you have the potential for making a big difference by doing science communication in India today. So coming to suggestions, again, this is a big field. There are many challenges, and no one can provide a magic solution to all of this. And what I wanted to do today is leave you with 3 ideas or 3 small suggestions, which may be a move in the right direction when it comes to enabling science communication in India. The first of it is moving away from the deficit model. So a lot of the science communication in India right now does operate on what is known as the deficit model. So here we assume that the job of the communicators is to take knowledge from one group of people who are the experts and convey it to another group of people who are the laymen. So there is a deficit on the level of the layman or the public, that there is a lack of information, and the job of the communicator is to fill this gap with this knowledge that they have taken. And I think many studies have shown that there are some major flaws in this model. Many cases it simply does not work. That's because that's not the way people work. They are not empty vessels to be filled. They have complex worldviews. They have reasons for believing what they believe. They have reasons for doing what they do. And assuming that every problem is being caused by a lack of information is not enough. What's needed, I think, is instead a dialogue where the audience is an equal participant in the discussion, where you are not just talking at the public or talking to the public, but you're talking with the public. You are seeking to understand them first before you try to just go at them with the information that you want to convey. So moving away from the deficit model is, I think, the very, very first step that we need to take. The second one, important, again, in India and perhaps in many of the developing countries, is to train a workforce. We cannot, as Ginny also mentioned, that we cannot rely on scientists to do all our science communication for us. They have not been trained for it. And similarly, science communicators, professional science communicators, if they have to grow and thrive, we need to create an ecosystem that allows them to do so. So at the very basic level, we need training we need degree level, diploma level, whatever level courses or even short-term workshops that at least teach the basics of science communication or science journalism to students or people who are willing to explore this field. Right now, almost most people who want to do this have to go abroad, and that's not an option for many people. There should be viable career paths, and this means that it should be possible to make a living doing science communication. There should be opportunities for professional growth. There should be a peer network, and there should be a mechanism via which communicators can also provide feedback to each other, so that again, that these the science communicators basically, they have room and a nurturing environment in which they can grow. And finally, very importantly, it's, as the pandemic has shown us, trust in science, trust in scientists, and trust in the media are at an all-time low. And this is something we need to reverse if we want to have any sort of impact with our science communication. And I think the first step here is knowing not to patronize your audience. Very often we see science communication as this bringing the light of knowledge to the ignorant masses or something like that. No, that's wrong. Your audience is intelligent, they are capable, they may not have the knowledge maybe that you want to provide to them, but that does not make them ignorant or idiots or whatever other epithets that I've heard people use. So inform, don't patronize. The second one is there need to be checks and balances. Misreporting, spreading misinformation, there have to be consequences to this, even if that consequence is in the form of a loss of reputation or whatever. There have to be sufficient incentive for communicators to maintain accuracy in reporting. Finally, second last, it's important to make science less mysterious. Many of us have this perception of science. Even I had this before I started my PhD and actually saw the inside of a research institution, that scientists are these geniuses, eccentric geniuses who sit in there like ivory towers and they do interesting things in the middle of the night, and out of those discoveries come. But it's important to demystify this process, to make it clear that scientists are people and doing science is a human endeavor. It is a process. There is nothing mystical or amazing, or it is amazing, but there is nothing very hidden about it. So that is important. And finally, it's again, many of the times we try to counter misinformation by simply putting the right information somewhere, and we think that this might be enough for the public. So they have the wrong source of information, they have the right source of information, and they're going to pick out the right one if we just put it out there. And again, that does not work, because for the public, these are both statements coming from people in positions of authority, perhaps a newspaper or a magazine or a politician. So we need to give them reasons to trust. We need to show them the flaws in logic that lie behind the misinformation. So all of these together, I think, are steps towards rebuilding trust from the public that we have perhaps lost. So with this, I'm actually going to wrap this up, and I'll be happy to discuss more over questions later on. That's my contact, and I'll be, again, very happy to hear from everyone. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Shreya, highlighting the issues, challenges, and opportunities in science communication. And of course, in India, as well as I think in developing countries also, so we have to institutionalize this science communication concept. Basically, in India also, so we have science communications at our premier institutions like IITs are there, ISERs are there, and different labs are there. But when we talk about some universities, so in every university we don't have science communication positions, so we need to connect with those other peoples. So at so it's not a perfect way basically. So we should have some means positions of science communicators in our university system also. Then only it can means you can pass the right message to our stakeholders. And apart from that, so since India is a developing country, even from our state, from Rajasthan, so it's the biggest state in India. So we do have remote places at where you have to connect with those students, even though they are not having that kind of facility. Internet facilities again are a challenge. So how you communicate to them, and of course in their native language. So we have to find right kind of communicators, science communicators, who can communicate the things to these stakeholders. So definitely challenges are there, but we have to be optimistic. Things are on the right path, and people like Nelly, Ginny, and of course like Shreya. So you people are there, and of course things will move in the right direction. And let's start our Q&A session. So to start with, Neil, so since you are the head communication at Institute of Ecology and Biodiversity at Chile, so is your institution is connected with universities in communicating their research and other things of IEB, or is it autonomous institute, means so it has no direct communication with your universities? If you just please let us know how you communicate the results of your research practices to the universities in Chile.
So thank you for the question, Manu. So yes, I work for a research institute, but people usually ask us, so where are you located? And we are everywhere and we're nowhere, because Chile about 20 years ago started having big funding. Let's just call it big funding. Before 20 years ago, there was just funding for specific 2 to 3 year projects for 1 or 2 researchers. And 20 years ago, the government decided to create these big funds for lots of scientists to work together in much bigger endeavors over periods of 10, 15 years long. So this institute I work for, the Institute of Ecology and Biodiversity, has researchers from 6 different universities, and they are in their universities, and the people that support them, financial staff and communication staff, we are in different cities in Chile, but we basically visit universities, or we used to visit universities before the pandemic hit. And also our research stations in different ecosystems in the country. So basically we support the scientists. I work with journalists, with designers, and sometimes I also hire a social scientist or informatics professionals, artists, depending on the project. The scientists know that we exist. So every time they're going to release a paper, for example, I don't know, even before it's released, when it's still under embargo, they get in touch with us, they send us the paper, we discuss it, and then our journalist interviews them and creates a press release. And then as soon as the embargo is lifted, we start sending the press release to different media outlets. On the other side, we also have a strong social media presence. So everything we do is reflected in our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages. And as everyone else around the world, we switched a lot of our activities to online activities. So all of our, in-person science cafes, for example, turn into webinars. All of our courses, our urban ecology, our courses for teachers, etc., all of them became, online activities. And we work actually very independently from the scientists. Besides, the creating the press releases, we decide who to invite, and we decide sort of the discourse we want to create, because the scientists, this is my personal experience, are very intent in communicating their own results, like their latest papers. But Chilean society still thinks of ecology as just recycling and using less plastic, because And when they think about ecology, they think about defending territories, from big corporations, etc. They don't think of ecology as a science. So ecologism has been, it's perceived as something completely different from ecology. So in our in the interface that we create as science communicators with the public, we usually try to fill much earlier gaps. So we can show them our latest research, but I try to focus more on showing them that ecology is a science and that it has to do with their local fights, their territorial fights for less pollution, etc. I try to bridge that gap and to teach basics. Usually the scientists are not aware that people they don't even know what ecology, as I'm saying, is. So they think that they have to keep communicating this sort of high-level research data. So I try to put them in a context that I know by experience that it's very different. So that's sort of the play field. Okay, so trying to fill earlier gaps, try to be open for people's questions that most of the time have nothing to do with the specific research our researchers do. So I try to bridge that gap and bring scientists closer to what people want and need, because I think that the two topics have been separated for way too long, and it's damaging to a country that has to rethink its future. We're right now in the process of choosing the people who will write our new constitution. We've been looking at India's constitution, by the way. You have this thing in the constitution about building scientific temper. We science communicators in Chile are super excited about that, and we're going to try to include that in the discussion, though it's a very niche, topic. But that's a little bit how we're confronting our work nowadays.
Of course, Nili. So another point is that since you work in this biodiversity and ecology area, and many institutions are there, means United Nations is there, and of course another international bodies are also there. So they are working, producing great results, and means many reports are there, like IPCC reports is there, then climate change reports and other things are there. So how you means communicate such kinds of developments that are taking place at international arena to the local people or to the rural communities. So means what challenges do you face means in communicating such kind of, because when you talk about these reports, so they means all these consultations means are taking place at a very high level. So to communicate to our rural communities or to the very means to the local people, so how's it's the challenge?
Indeed, it's a challenge. So a few years ago, I was feeling quite low about my profession, thinking, what good is all the books, all of the courses, all of the interesting things we do for people if people who are consuming them are basically people that are already interested in ecology? So how do we reach other communities? How do we reach vulnerable communities that may never have an access to green areas, that not even call it nature? Okay, they don't have access to that. How do we reach them? And it's proven very difficult because I don't know the word in English, but what's that thing that some people put in horses so that they can only see the road ahead? So blinders. So I think we have blinders, and we always think from what we know, but it's very rare that we ask other people, what do you need and what do you want? How can I, with my knowledge, serve you? So we had a couple mishaps trying to do that thing, like reach people that are not interested in ecology, that the best thing they can think of doing with their weekend is going to the mall. Okay, and we had a really hard time. So what we did that worked was hire a social scientist, a sociologist, to do focus groups and do a study of our audiences on one side and a study of our scientists on the other side. So what do you think should be communicated? What do you want to know? What do you want to tell? And why? And how do you think that should be done? Those were the questions asked to the scientists. And to our different audiences, the questions were similar, not the same, but what do you need to know and how do you need it told? Okay, basically asking what format would be best for you. And we've been working based on the results from that study. So, for example, I don't know if in other places it's the same thing is happening, but here, since it's a very political moment in our country, all the scientists are talking about reaching, decision makers. So I make the best science for decision making, but it's a phrase. How does that actually happen? They think I wrote the paper, so the information is there. I'm giving information to some entity that supposedly makes decisions, but how does that information reach them? It's a very specific and challenging question, okay? And it depends also on the specific decision-making people. So I could say, I want to reach the president. I want to reach the higher circle of the executive power. That's one thing, and it has its strategies, long-term strategies. But you can say, I want to reach the parliament. So I need to go to the people that work with the senators and the representatives, okay? Or maybe you want to do something way more local. I need to go to the municipality, to the city government of this rural area and talk to the technical, staff there. Those things are different, and they have their different formats. And those are the things that we're trying to help the scientists do. For example, we've been working with different activists in terms of changing the law, basically changing the law that describes what a forest is here in Chile. So the scientists, they wanted to write their own law, and then everyone else, including me, told them, you're not a lawyer. You do not know how to write a law. So why don't we look for people that are already trying to change the law, and we give them the best science we can? So that's what we did in that particular example. So one of the activists, she was way more politically savvy than all of the scientists together, she said, I'm already working with Representative so-and-so, who wants the same thing, already has a law project in the parliament about not replacing native forest after a fire, which was creating really perverse incentives for, the real estate companies to create fires in order to say that's not a forest anymore. So now we can build, more houses. So we reached those that representative and his team, and I was surprised. He was so open to rewriting his project based on what the scientists were saying, and now they're working together. But it has to be like that. It can't come from just one group. Scientists are not going to do anything together alone except write papers, right? Science communication is an interdisciplinary universe, and you need a diversity of points of view. Okay, you need more women there. You need more diversity, ethnic diversity, and you need more socioeconomic diversity. Here in Chile, we don't have much of racial issues, but we have huge class struggle. So you need to incorporate all of those views and work together and put all of those kinds of knowledge on the table to talk. Not one knowledge above the other, but really talk. And in that particular experience, I have a lot of hope because the scientists have been listening and have been answering the questions that other people have. So I think it's going to turn to be a very successful, we're going to change the law. And it's not because of the scientists alone, but because all of us work together, including the local people defending their territories from, encroaching industry in this case.
Nelly, don't you feel this means these rural communities or even the villagers, they are more aware in protecting biodiversities? Basically when we talk about our cities, even in India, means so we have beautification plans of our cities, but we don't care of that biodiversity or ecology concept when we are developing our cities. Whereas in villages, it still means they have the tradition to protect their biodiversity. So what's your view on this particular point?
My view has changed over time, and it's partly based on data. I think it's true. I don't believe in romanticizing poverty or essentializing, the rural or the indigenous way of life. But yes, I mean, they have lived with the land. Those communities don't have this very, I think, perverse and pervasive view that we who want to believe we're from the West think that we are separate from nature. They don't see it that way, because their dependence on, the other species, it's evident, it's obvious in their daily life. So yes, they know how to protect those areas better. Of course, there's been so much pressure on people due to lack of jobs and lack of independence. As the right that people have to, build their own subsistence, is taken away from them. As when people have to look for jobs, people that before were able to support their own communities on their own. Of course, there's a lot of incentives towards, just taking the job that the local, forestry company is giving them. But over time, we're seeing that just creates more poverty. In Chile, there's a documentary called Planting Poverty, in terms of, dispelling this myth that the big forestry industries are creating jobs. They're creating more poverty in many ways. And so I think they do. They have a better knowledge of how to take care of the land, because they have been doing it, and we have to listen to them a lot more. And it's also fair because they have real knowledge. They have empirical knowledge based on hundreds, if not thousands of years of a way of life. And we have to start listening to them. And part of the lack of trust in science they have, and there's a really big, very studied example in the UK with the Sellafield and the Northern Lake situation, where scientists did not listen to the local knowledge, and then they didn't listen, and the local people actually knew better the land, and they had better answers, and they actually collected better data for the questions they had, and the scientists didn't, and they didn't listen. And those are the things that break trust. The last very short thing I want to say, because I really want to hear what Ginny and Shreya have to say, is India gave us one of the biggest ecofeminism movements, and it came from the rural areas, right? Vandana Shiva, and she's a huge example. I mean, not only she, but the huge movement they created. So of course people know how to take care of the land, and we should be listening way more.
Thank you, Nelly. Definitely, we would love to hear on the other aspect also of science journalism. But some of the questions we will take up with Jenny. So, Jenny, if you just please let our audience know about your journey. Means since you have studied psychology and then neuroscience, then how you have converted all these expertise field in science communication.
Yeah, well, I've always loved science. I was one of those kids who was always asking questions and wanting to know how things worked and all of that kind of thing. And I thought that I was going to go into research, but I was quite unwell at university with chronic fatigue syndrome, which I still suffer from. And so I took a year out after university and thought, well, I'll try a research job part-time before I commit. I was also really struggling to narrow down what kind of tiny area of neuroscience or psychology I wanted to study, because of course doing your degree you get to look at loads of it, and then a PhD you have to pick one tiny little area. So I got a part-time research job, and then I started volunteering with a bunch of different organizations. So I studied at the University of Cambridge, and I stayed in Cambridge after I graduated. So I volunteered with a couple of university organizations that did outreach in schools. I wrote a couple of articles for a couple of kind of online publications and things. Just as I was sort of trying things out, I also tried working with a mental health charity and a few other things. And I just sort of realized that it was the talking to people, and particularly talking to kids about science, that I really loved. There was just something about being that person who could get that wow moment from a kid when you show them an experiment, or particularly in my area, I do a lot of illusions and kind of perception tricks and things, and just that look on their faces where you've kind of blown their little minds briefly, and then you can explain that no, it's not magic, it's science. That was the thing that really kind of hooked me. So that was why I decided, well, I thought I'll put the PhD on hold for a year and I'll try science communication. I can always do the PhD later. And that hasn't happened. I've been very much enjoying science communication. It's also a lot easier to fit around my health limitations. So I can work from home a lot of the time. I can, when I am doing stuff like going into schools, which is very high energy, I can make sure I only book one a week or something for me to do myself. So I can kind of manage that a lot better. Whereas I think a lab setting would still be quite challenging for me. I'm not sure. I think it is getting better, but I think there are quite a lot of issues for disabled people working in science, and that's something we need to tackle as well.
So great. And just if you just let us know about your observations about the human brain from a neuroscientist and science communicator.
Yeah, so I think knowing a bit about how the brain works definitely helps in communicating science, because you can there are some things that you're told as a communicator, but that once you know why, it kind of makes more sense. So the fact that humans are social animals and that we have evolved for stories, and particularly stories about people, and that is something that people will remember. And the other thing is people often remember how they felt more than they remember what they actually learnt. So a lot of the time when I'm going into a school and I'm doing a show, it would be great if the kids came away understanding what a neuron is and how they send messages around the brain. But actually what's more important to me is that they go away thinking, that was really interesting and I want to find out more. That's kind of what I'm trying to get, that feeling of curiosity. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing is Q&A at the end of my shows, and letting the kids ask me whatever they want about the brain, and I do my best to answer it. But a lot of the time the answer is, I don't know, because no one knows. And scientists are still trying to work this out. And I think the way science is taught in schools, at least the way I experienced it, it was very much like it was something that was finished. Like, here are the facts that we know about the world. And that's not true in any science, but it's particularly not true in neuroscience and psychology. There is so much that we still don't understand about the brain. And I think kids like that. I think they enjoy feeling like we're all in this together. This is one theory that one scientist put forward, and this is another theory, but it's really hard to test. Can you think about how you might test that theory? Bringing those kind of concepts to them, I think is something that I really enjoy, and trying to get their emotions and their curiosity going as much as telling them stuff about the brain.
So of course, so what's your observations or your thoughts on whether there should be a strong intersection between science communication and art illustration for an effective outcome?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the links between art and science. There's some brilliant science illustrators in the UK who do some really great work. And I think we know that humans take in information pictorially very well, and particularly if you are talking to someone. One of the big tips that I always give scientists is try not to have lots of words up on the screen if you want people to be listening to what you're saying, because our brain can't process words through the eyes and the brain at the same time, and the ears at the same time. So either they're reading or they're listening to you. So I think actually having beautifully illustrated images while you're talking to someone about something can really, really help. I think it's also, there's been some really nice use of illustrated books for very young kids to start introducing them to science concepts before they're ready to read lots of words. There's a quantum physics for babies, and a whole series of them that I've been looking at buying my nephew, which it's amazing. You can introduce these concepts so young, but you couldn't do that without the illustration. But I think the other thing that art science combos can bring together is the fact that often in in my experience, in the West at least, we see artists and scientists as like the opposite ends of scales. So either you're an artistic person or you're a scientific person. And I grew up thinking I wasn't creative because I loved science. I was good at maths. You know, that was the group that I was in, and I couldn't draw. So I kind of grew up thinking I wasn't a creative person. And now I'm creative every day. I write, I come up with demos, but scientists are also creative. I mean, if anything, science is the most creative thing you can do because you're coming up with new ideas about the world. So I think the bringing together of art and science and breaking of those silos and letting people know that science, as you were saying earlier, science isn't just something done by geniuses in ivory towers. We need people who are good at maths and stuff, but we also need creativity. We need different ways of thinking about the world. And that's what's going to move science forward. So creativity and artisticness can very much be a part of science as well.
So great. Of course, Ginny, means even in our routine work, we do interact with many science communicator, but it is the very first time. So we are interacting with any neuroscientist, or from biodiversity, from ecology, from AI, from quantum. So we do interact with many scientists and science communicators. But of course, it's a very nice thing that you are there. And just if you can share a couple of one or two examples. Means just to know about the role of chemicals in our brain and how you communicate the same to your stakeholders.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a huge topic. So what can I tell you about that's nice? Okay, so who here drinks coffee? Pretty much everyone. Yep. Okay, great. A few of you got coffee with you. So caffeine is a chemical that gets into the brain, and it affects a part of the brain that controls wake and sleep. So there are a few different things that tell you when it's time for you to go to sleep. But one of them is the buildup of this particular chemical called adenosine. And adenosine is produced by your brain cells during their kind of normal processes that they're going through throughout the day. It's like a byproduct. So it builds up throughout the day. And the longer you've been awake, the more adenosine you have in this particular region of the brain. And that tells your brain that it's time to go to sleep. So that's why if you pull an all-nighter or stay up really late, you feel really tired because you've got lots of this adenosine. What caffeine does is it blocks the receptors that normally bind to that adenosine and tell your brain that it's there. So once caffeine's in your system, your brain can no longer detect the adenosine, and that makes it think that you haven't been awake for as long as you have. The problem is, your brain doesn't like it when you add extra chemicals into it. It's really finely balanced, and it's always trying to keep that balance, which is where the title of my book, Overloaded, came from, because your brain is always trying to stop itself being overloaded. So actually, over time, the more coffee you drink, the less you respond to the caffeine. And we don't know exactly what the process is, but it could be a few different things. So it could be that the brain produces more adenosine receptors, or it could be that it starts making more adenosine, or becomes more sensitive. We think it becomes more sensitive to it, basically. So that means that after you've been drinking coffee for a little while, that first cup doesn't actually make you feel extra alert. It just makes you feel how alert you would have felt if you'd never drunk coffee at all. And if you want to actually get a boost from caffeine, you have to only drink it occasionally. If you drink it every day, it doesn't actually have that extra benefit. So that's just one chemical and how it impacts kind of one aspect of brain chemistry. It was a really interesting book to write because it is so complicated. And there are so many chemicals that have different effects in different parts of the brain. And there's so much where the science isn't joined up yet. So you find one paper that says one thing about one chemical, one receptor in one area, and something completely different in another area. And trying to sort of join it up and make a cohesive, understandable story was a bigger challenge than I realized when I pitched the idea to my my publisher, to be honest. But it was really, really interesting. And I'm sure there's stuff in there that will be proved wrong over the next year. But I did my best to kind of take a snapshot of our understanding at the moment. And there were loads of we don't knows in there as well, but also some interesting stories and some kind of useful takeaway points and things that we can learn from what we do know about how to kind of understand our brains better and use that to improve our lives.
Of course, Jeannie, thank you. One question is also there. So it's means to you, Jeannie, and of course, we would like to hear from Shreya also on this aspect. So, since during our research time, means when we do our research in university or in some institution, so whether so it will be appropriate if our research scholars, while doing their PhD, so they should be given some kind of credit or some kind of course during their as part of their PhD program, 2 or 3 months. So whether means any individual he or she can identify herself or itself, means whether she is or he is having that kind of means temperament or interest in science communication. So what's your observation in this?
Yeah, I think it's really beneficial when there is at least the opportunity to have some science communication training. Not necessarily that we should make it mandatory for every PhD student, but that there is the option there. And I've worked with Cambridge University. They do put on various different kind of enrichment trainings, I guess, trainings on things around the core science. And some of these are focused on science communication. I've run my storytelling training for them a few times for their researchers. And I've had really nice feedback. But I've also had experiences, particularly when I've been interviewing scientists for a podcast or a radio show that I've made, where they haven't had any training, and I've had to effectively coach them through the interview as we've been doing it, which is fine when you're doing a pre-recorded interview. But sometimes scientists have a paper that gets picked up by the media and they're suddenly expected to do back-to-back live radio interviews with no training. And I actually had an experience with a researcher at Adam Brooks Hospital in Cambridge who had a paper that was picked up by the media. And we managed to interview her the day before the embargo broke because it was a pre-recorded thing. So I was the first person who interviewed her. And then she emailed me a few days later and said that she'd done that thing where you're in a little booth and you're being beamed into all the different radio stations. And she'd done a couple of live TV things and a couple more podcasts. And she emailed me and said she was so glad that I was the first person who interviewed her because I had the time to sort of stop a few times and go, I'm not sure that's kind of the crux of what you're trying to, and just coach her through it a little bit. So I do think that sometimes we throw our scientists in at the deep end and that might put them off and make them distrust the media. And I've had a few times where scientists have been reluctant to talk to me because they've had really bad experiences with journalists. So I think there's definitely benefits both for society, for journalism, and for the scientists themselves in if they might have to do it at some point, then give them the opportunity to learn how to do it. We don't expect people to know how to do science without training them. Why do we expect people to know how to communicate?
Of course, very rightly said, Jenny. And Shreya, your observations on this particular point?
Yeah. So I agree basically with what Jenny said. And I also think learning how to communicate well can be an asset for a scientist, whether they apply it to doing science communication to the public or they apply it to communicating with their peers. I think some level of communication training is a very, very good thing, basically. And perhaps that amount of training should be made available to everybody who joins a research institution or an university, whether as a student or even later on in their careers. Like it's not necessary that you have to pick it up when you are a student. If you are an established scientist who has been doing science for 50 years and now you want to learn, that's perfectly fine. And that opportunity should be available. And at the same time, I think in addition to providing training, we need to incentivize people who opt for such kinds of training. Very often there is this perception that anytime you are spending on communicating science is time you are not spending in doing science. And there's this sort of stigma against doing things, that this is a waste of time, or these are not serious scientists who are spending so much time talking to the media or to the public. And that needs to be fought actively. And that's where I think incentives, whether they be credits for the students or being considered during hiring or promotion decisions or any of those for established scientists, I think they come in as well. So I think institutions should do both. One, provide this training, make it available, and two, make sure that those who opt for this training are receive the benefits in some way, are incentivized in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. You rightly said, Shreya, even in India, means these things are there. So I hope you have heard about this Science Technology Innovation Policy, STIP. So probably there are some recommendation made in this policy for science communicators. I hope once this policy is implemented in different institutions across the India, things will improve. So just to listen from you, Shreya. So since India Bioscience, you do lot many activities in the for our researchers, for our postdoctoral fellows, for our scientists. You do connect uh, both researchers and scientists. So to communicate means the real science from our science labs, basically like CSIR labs are there, or means this Department of Atomic Energy labs are there. So what I'm trying to raise the point is that so the medium of communication means so in a native language, so it is more easy to communicate that kind of science to the students. So what's your observations, since most of the programs you do from India Bioscience are probably in English only. So but what about other languages?
Yeah. No, what you have raised is a very, very important point. I think the last time I saw statistics like this, it says 13%, I think, of Indians actually are fluent in English. And yet that is the language where 99% of our science communication takes place. And that is an important thing to keep in mind. As we mentioned, the English speaking public are the generally more educated public, the more urban people who already know a fair bit about science, and they are the people we are reaching when we are doing communication in English. Now here, the limitations sort of come in when we want to do regional language communication. First of it is how many of these there are. So India, it's not like English and there is one native language. It is English plus hundreds of other languages. So no one organization can conceivably try to communicate in all of these languages. What many people end up doing is creating translations. That is, first something is published in English and then you coordinate volunteer efforts, and then you have it translated into various languages for distribution. So that has its place, and that's a very useful activity. However, many things do get lost in translation. Languages are not just, they cannot be like literally transformed from one to the other. They come with different ways of understanding the world. So translated literature would never have the same impact as something that was created in that particular language. So what is needed is, we have understood, is from our experience, as you mentioned, most of our work is in English, but we have partnered with other organizations for regional language communications, which is that somewhere there needs to be a grassroots level organization, that people who speak a certain language are connected to the communities in that language. They need to come together, and actually many people are doing this. There are wonderful science communication initiatives in Kannada, for example. There are in Marathi, Bengali, where I come from. So certain languages, there is a rich culture of communicating science in these languages. What's needed perhaps is an initiative to get these grassroots level organizations talking to each other, sharing their experience, learning from each other, and perhaps have somebody at the national level or the federal level to coordinate these efforts, to make sure there's a pot of funding, say, that can go to people who want to start up a regional language initiative in one of the states, or to make sure that if somebody who's, let's say, very fluent in communicating in a regional language, but they don't have the training in science to complement it, that we have the ability to supply that resource or that training and bring people together. So, as you mentioned, this is a complex problem, especially given the size of our population and the number of languages that are spoken in our country. And again, a coordinated effort, I think, is needed more than anything to bridge this gap.
Yeah, Nelly, please.
I just wanted to comment on the training topic we just discussed. For me, every time I do a training, I try to have a diverse audience. So when I get hired to do training or teaching courses for grad students or undergraduates, etc., I try to have it not just for researchers, but to have in the same room the people that come from communications, the journalists, etc., and the researchers, because they need to understand each other and, again, build trust between them. Just like Jeannie said, a lot of scientists have had bad experiences with the media and then they're shut. I don't want to do it again. I completely understand that. So when you have them in the same room and you start, talking about this, they understand where they come from, how they were trained in their universities, how they reach closer to the truth in their own professions, in the ethos of their profession. So first they start just yelling at each other. So like, you do this, you guys are really bad. You guys, you don't know how to talk to the public. You're always so blah, blah. And then they start understanding each other and building those connections that last a lifetime. So I think that's important for them to see each other, understand how they do it. Like, scientists say, just call me next week. And the journalist says, I don't have that time because I have to write this today together with 6 other topics. And scientists think it's because they're doing it at the last minute. That's how journalism works. And they need to understand that. So that's one thing. And the other I wanted to mention is about providing training, providing opportunities. I completely agree, but I think it's an even bigger issue. Right now, I'm working with the science ministry here in Chile. They're trying to build paths for diversifying the trajectories of people who are trained in science. And science communication is one of them, but also scientists that go into government or scientists that go into scientific publishing, scientists that end up going into the industry. And here in Chile, when you learn science, you're basically taught just how to do research and nothing else. But we need people with PhDs in all of those areas and probably more that I can't think of right now. So you need to provide opportunities for training, also the incentives, just like Shreya said, and also just to meet people that have done that. So I've met lots of younger people that said, I studied science, but I also liked art. I had to choose. I had no idea that this path towards science communication even existed. So show them people, that's even easier than providing the trainees. Just have a seminar series when people that are studying science can see that they can end up elsewhere with their scientific training. It's not that they have to, I started over, I reject what I did before, and now I work in government. You're a scientist that ended up applying all of that incredible things that we learn when we learn science about how to think and how to reach conclusions and how to think critically, but you can apply that in some other area. And I think we need to provide those opportunities for breaking stereotypes as well.
You rightly said, Nelly. And another point that I want to make is that even in India, of course, when we shift from national to regional levels, so in science journalism area, we don't have that kind of stuff who can write good stories, means good technical stories about science in the regional newspapers. So we need to train, or we have to have some capacity building kind of thing. So we should have a good stuff who can write in a good, means in a very efficient way to communicate the real stories of science in the regional newspaper also. Of course, on the national level, we have good quality stuff, and of course in the electronic media, so we have the wire with us. So science stories are written by the scientists, but in regional level, in native languages, we don't find many scientists who are ready to write in the native languages and a good piece of scientific communication to the common masses. So it's really a challenge. So but I hope in the coming days, through our the policies taken by various state governments and of course by government of India, so things will improve. And to Ginny, just to ask you, since you have chosen this field as an individual, this science communication, and your passion and energy, and I have seen of couple of your podcast, your website, and so it's really commendable. Means what kind of message or what kind of story or a message you want to give to youngsters, young scholars who are doing science to make their career in science communication? Yeah.
So I guess my biggest tip would be just to start doing it, to find somewhere where you can start writing, even if it's your own blog, just start one, or start making videos or podcasts. Don't wait for someone, an institution to get you to do it, because I mean, even in the UK, there aren't that many jobs in science communication. There are some within institutions, so you can work in like a press office at a university or something, writing press releases. But doing what I do, the really public facing stuff, it wasn't like I could just find a job where I did it. I had to start doing it and then kind of build it up myself. And the best way to learn is just by jumping in. So I learned so much working with the Naked Scientists because they just put me on air and I had to say things because otherwise I was ruining live radio. And I think there are courses you can do. I haven't done any courses in science communication. I went straight from my degree to working in it, and I have learnt on the job. So I think if there aren't courses you can get to, if there aren't obvious ways to do it, if you're still studying, you can just start doing it. And look for communities that you can join, even if it's particularly at the moment remotely. So I know in the UK there are lots of SciComm meetups. I'm living in Singapore at the moment, and I found that there wasn't one in this part of the world. So I started Southeast Asia SciComm Facebook group, and we have online meetups from time to time. So find other people who want to write about science, read each other's work, help each other. But yeah, just start doing it and start getting feedback on your work, because I think it's the best way to learn.
Great, Ginny, really inspiration from your story. And of course, I would like to do, before closing this webinar, so I would like to thank Nelly for your observations, because since you are associated with many activities from science journalism to scientists with policymakers in your country. And Ginny, since she has taken up this career as an individual and doing great things. And of course, Shreya has shared some real stories from India Bioscience, and of course from her own experience in this field. So great. And thanks a lot to all of you for your time and support for this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thanks, Jeannie, Shreya, Manu.
Thanks
Bye.
for having us.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you all.
Ciao, ciao.